Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today we're going to talk about the art of happiness. And this is written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Howard Cutler, MD. This book came out in 1998, and I actually thought about reading it for quite some time, and then dove into it about a year ago, and I thought it was a pretty inspiring work. I think that, no matter what your religion is, and what your faith is, there's always something to be learned and something that can be cultivated or gleaned from other people's thoughts. And this primary thought of this book is that happiness is a choice. And it's one that you have to work towards, but it's still a choice. So Tenzin Gyatso is the 14th Dalai Lama, and he is the spiritual leader and temporal leader of the Tibetan people. And they are Buddhist monks, so he's a Buddhist spiritual leader. His tireless efforts on behalf of human rights and world peace have brought him international recognition, and this was true back in the early 2000s and late 1990s. He received the Wallenberg Award, which was conferred by the U.S. Congressional Human Rights Foundation, and the Albert Schweitzer Award, as well as a Nobel Peace Prize. And Howard Cutler, MD, is a diplomat of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. And he first met the Dalai Lama in 1982 while visiting India on a research grant to study Tibetan medicine. Dr. Cutler maintains a private psychiatric practice in Phoenix. What was interesting about the book is the psychological thought process and what we would do around psychological cure and treatments for those with psychological damage that are dealing with mental issues. The Dalai Lama's suggestions are hand in hand with a lot of those suggestions that come from our very modern culture. They typically go hand in hand. So in this book, it goes through different situations where he has conversations with the Dalai Lama to say, all right, we handle it this way, how do you handle this? And it was interesting, the Tibetan Buddhism processes came very similar to what was coming out of our care. So traditional care is lined up with modern scientific thought process. So to dive right in, the Dalai Lama believes that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. That is clear. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness. If you maintain a feeling of compassion, loving kindness, then something automatically opens your inner door. Through that, you can communicate more easily with other people, and the feeling of warmth creates a kind of openness. You'll find that all human beings are just like you, and you'll be able to relate with them more easily. That gives you a spirit of friendship. Then there's less need to hide things, and as a result, feelings of fear, self-doubt, and insecurity are automatically dispelled. I think that's a pretty good quote on what he thinks and how that feels. What I got from it overall is that he goes into a situation seeking out a connection. So his viewpoint is, I focus on what we have in common versus what separates us. And everyone ultimately that you're going to deal with is human. You breathe air in your lungs, and that's what keeps you alive, and you have to eat and drink to survive. So those are things that you have in common. So no matter how different you are from someone else, there are more things that you have in common with that person than differences. I think that's a great way to look at things. So in Tibetan or Buddhism specifically, there's a psyche or a spirit that includes intellect, feeling, heart, and mind. By bringing a certain inner discipline, we can undergo a transformation of our attitude, and the entire outlook of our approach on living can be adjusted. When we speak of inner discipline or inner peace, that's what this means. It's the control of that psyche. Identifying factors which lead to happiness and identifying factors which lead to suffering, and then targeting the right thing, having this done, is how you change how you feel and how you operate. And you gradually can eliminate the factors which lead to suffering and cultivate those which lead to happiness. And that is the way of enlightenment. The purpose of our existence in his book is to seek happiness. In Christian methodology, the purpose is to do God's will, is to make God happy. That's our purpose in Christian's methodology. But in this Buddhist methodology from Tibet, it is to achieve happiness. Happy people, in contrast, are generally found to be more sociable, flexible, creative, and are able to tolerate life's daily frustrations more easily than unhappy people. That's how we tie in when we talk about emotional intelligence, or we talk about stoicism, not allowing the emotion to damage you. Basically, what he's saying is if you're striving after the happy, they're the things that make you happy, you have the same sort of control as you would with those other psychological or philosophical thought processes. Researchers have devised some interesting experiments demonstrating that happy people exhibit a certain quality of openness and willingness to reach out and help others. I thought that was a pretty good likeness into the same between his theology and the science. So, happiness is determined by one's state of mind instead of external events. Success may result in a temporary feeling of elation, or a tragedy may send us into a period of depression, but sooner or later we'll find our overall level of happiness tends to migrate back to a certain baseline. Psychologists call this adaptation, right? That's when we adapt to the situation, and what used to be extreme in our minds now can become our norm, and we're fine with it. Our feeling of contentment is strongly influenced by our tendency to compare. So I actually said something about that in an earlier video. In Jordan Peterson's book, The 12 Rules of Life, he said, don't compare yourself to others, just compete against yourself. This is saying to be happy, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to others. Constant comparison with those who are smarter or more beautiful or more successful than ourselves also tends to breed envy, frustration, and unhappiness. But we can use the same principle in a positive way. We can increase our feeling of life satisfaction by comparing ourselves to those who are less fortunate than us, and by reflecting on all the things that we have. So basically, shifting your perspective and contemplating on how things could be worse should impact your ability to stay happy. In Buddhism, for instance, there is a reference to our 4 factors of fulfillment, or happiness. They are wealth, worldly satisfaction, spirituality, and enlightenment. For example, good health is considered to be one of the necessary factors for a happy life. Another factor we regard as a source of happiness is our material facilities, or the wealth that we accumulate. An additional factor is to have friendship or companions, and we all recognize that in order to enjoy fulfilled life, we need a circle of friends to whom we can relate both emotionally and in caring and trust. With all those factors in line, you can have a fulfilled life, and your state of mind is key. So even if you have all those things, if your state of mind is just overall negative and pessimistic, you will not be happy. The idea of the book, though, is that happiness is a choice, and you need to choose to be that and focus on the things that make you happy versus on the things that make you miserable. If you're mentally unhappy or frustrated, the physical comfort is not much help. On the other hand, if you can maintain a calm, peaceful state of mind, then you can be a very happy person, even if you have poor health. And you've seen this over and over. I give to St. Jude, and some of those children that have cancer that are dying and that have died had some of the most positive outlooks and upbringing, positive feelings possible. So even though they should have been frustrated greatly because of the health, they chose to spend the time and share their light versus to share that darkness. Remember about the greater level of calmness in our mind, the greater level of peace in our mind. So calm is peace. The greater ability to be happy comes from that peace, and joy comes from that peace. So let me say this. If you're in a world where you spend so much time on social media and you're listening to all these opinions and it's negative, 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 talk radio did that before social media, what it was. People were separated on the left and right and good and bad and this and that. On talk radio, it does the same thing. It creates a place that can be toxic or can be, overly opinionated and negative in your mind, so you can't stay positive and you can't be happy. So that's something worth calling out. Make sure you pay attention to that diet. I've talked about that before in videos, what you ingest, what you listen to, what you watch, what you say, especially self-speak. That can do a lot of damage. You want to make sure you keep those things positive. One interesting thing about greed is although the underlying motive is to seek satisfaction, the irony is that even after obtaining the object of your desire, you're still not satisfied. The antidote of greed is contentment. If you have a strong sense of contentment, it doesn't matter what you obtain, the object or not, either way, you are still content. And remember what we said in the psychology of money. Remember the Madoff and that crew, they were never content. The greed was just the greed. They got into such a mental state that they took themselves to the point that they lost everything because they didn't know how to have enough. You can relate to others because you are a human being within the human community. You share that bond if you don't share any other bond. You and that person, any human bond is enough to give a rise and a sense of self-worth and dignity. That bond can become a source of consolation in the event that you lose everything else. And the Dalai Lama says, I think without feeling of affection and connection with other fellows and human beings, life becomes very hard. He thinks that without feeling the feeling of affection and connection, life would be very hard. Happiness that depends on physical pleasure is unstable. That's one of the keys to divorce statistics. They say that people focus more on pleasure than they do on the actual relationship. And happiness that depends on mainly on pleasure is unstable. Happy and pleasure are two different things. So if happiness is totally tied to pleasure, gluttony, those things that basically too much pleasure can be damning. It could be something that is detrimental and can end you. We don't need more money. We don't need greater success or fame. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need the perfect body or the perfect mate. Right now, at this very moment, we have a mind, which is all the basic equipment we need to achieve complete happiness. So as you go through the book, you see that there's a lot of similarities through chapters. I did think that some points it was redundant, but I do think that it's highly enlightening. It's definitely worth the read. It basically comes down to the fact if you maintain a feeling of compassion, loving kindness, and then something automatically opens your inner door. I read that quote earlier. Through that, you can communicate with people more easily, more readily, and that feeling of warmth creates a kind of openness. You find that all human beings are just like you, so you'll be able to relate more quickly. When anger arises, it hurts you. Therefore, you can make a judgment to make anger less destructive. So I think the anger piece around your state of happiness is extremely important. And this is a quote that I've circled, so I'll read this. If we look at the very pattern of our existence from early age until our death, we can see that in a way we are fundamentally nurtured by others' affection. It begins at birth. Our very first act is an act of affection, of compassion. Without that act, we cannot survive. It's talking about mother's milk. That clear and action cannot be fulfilled unless there is mutual feeling of affection. For the child's side, there's no feeling of affection, no bond towards the person giving them the milk, then the child may not take it. And without the affection part of the mother or someone else, then the milk may not come freely. So that's the way of life. That's reality. Then our physical structure seems to be more suited to feelings of love and compassion. We can see how calm and affectionate, wholesome state of mind, we can see how that has a beneficial effect on our health and physical well-being. Conversely, feelings of frustration, fear, agitation, and anger can be destructive to our health. Anger, violence, and aggression may certainly arise, but I think it's a secondary or more superficial level in a sense. When they do arrive and we are frustrated in our efforts, we need to focus on that underlying cause and control our thoughts. So that's the primary reason in the book. I definitely think it's worth a read. Purpose of our life needs to be positive. We weren't born with the purpose of causing trouble, harming others. For our life to be of value, we must develop good human qualities, warmth, kindness, and compassion, and then our life becomes meaningful, more peaceful, and happier. So as you go through the book, you see that he gives different examples, and there's several examples that go back and forth between modern psychology and this thought process by the Dalai Lama. You should never, here's a quote, he says, you should never lose the sight of the importance of having a realistic attitude, being very sensitive and respectful to the concrete reality of your situation as you proceed on the path toward your ultimate goal. Recognize the differences inherent in your path and the fact that it may take time and consistent effort to progress. Goes back to what we said earlier about things of value versus things with speed. It doesn't have to be fast, it just has to be of value. Positive emotions are those which can be justified. Negative emotions are those which cannot be justified. So make sure you focus on positive emotions. I thought that was an interesting chapter. Our positive states of mind can act as antidotes to our negative tendencies and delusionary states of mind. The cultivation of certain specific positive mental qualities such as patience, tolerance, kindness, and so on can act as specific antidotes to negative states of mind such as anger, hatred, and attachment. Applying antidotes such as love and compassion can significantly reduce the degree or influence of mental, emotional afflictions. So there you go. The book is The Art of Happiness, and I definitely think it's worth the read. Get yourself a copy. I reread this one every year just because it focuses on the point that the way you feel and your positive outlook is something that you have to participate in. It's something that you have to decide you want to do, and something you have to go after. So that's the book review for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. Please share this channel with anyone you think may benefit from its content. I'm Ben. Be good.